was working late one night at an office park, and everything felt completely normal until I noticed something that didn't make sense. This happened a few years ago when I took a job as an overnight security guard. The complex had 3 buildings surrounded by woods. My shift went from 10 p.m. to 6 a.m. Most nights were silent. After the office workers left, the place became a ghost town, except for a cleaning crew that left by 1 a.m. After that, I was alone until sunrise, taking my breaks outside on a concrete bench near the entrance. Around midnight, I went out for my first break. I sat on the bench eating a quick snack. The lot was dark, lit by a few tall streetlights casting long shadows. The cleaning crew's van was parked near the second building, but looking past it toward the very back of the lot, something caught my eye. Parked all the way at the far end against the dark woodline was an old sedan. The car's headlights were off, and it looked completely dark inside. It definitely hadn't been there during my early rounds. I figured maybe an employee left it behind, but something felt off. My break ended, so I went back inside. I spent the next hour walking the quiet hallways. By the time I finished, it was just after 1 a.m. I watched from the windows as the cleaning crew drove away, leaving the complex in absolute silence. At 2:30 a.m., I stepped outside for my next break. A thin fog was rolling in. I sat on the bench and looked toward the woodline, but the sedan was gone. As I scanned the rest of the lot, I noticed something that made me freeze. The exact same dark sedan was still there, only now it was parked in the middle section, about 4 rows closer to the main building. It was sitting completely crooked, taking up 2 spaces with its lights off and the engine dead. I felt uneasy. If someone had come to pick it up, why would they just move it a few hundred feet closer and park it in the dark? I would have heard the engine start from inside the lobby, meaning they must have moved it quietly while I was deep inside the building. I walked to the edge of the sidewalk, squinting into the darkness. The windows were heavily tinted, and it was impossible to see inside. It was just a cold piece of metal sitting under the dim lights. The silence made the whole situation feel incredibly strange. I cut my break short and went back inside, locking the glass doors. I sat at the security desk, keeping my eyes glued to the monitor. The outdated cameras had terrible night vision, so on the screen, the sedan just looked like a blurry black shape. I stared at it for 30 minutes straight, waiting for a door to open, but nothing moved. By 3:30 a.m., I had to do my final walking patrol. Walking the higher floors, I kept stopping at the windows to keep tabs on the car. From the 3rd floor, I could see it clearly. It hadn't moved an inch, sitting dark and silent. I hurried through the rest of my rounds, wanting nothing more than to get back to the safety of the desk. I finished my patrol and made it downstairs around 4 a.m. The long night was wearing on me, and I needed some fresh air to stay awake. I figured since I was inside a locked building with thick glass doors, I could safely step out onto the bench for a few minutes. I pushed the door open, stepped outside, and my stomach dropped. The old sedan was now parked directly across from the employee entrance. It wasn't in a parking spot anymore. It was sitting right in the yellow glow of the overhead light, barely 15 feet away, completely blocking the fire lane. The car was positioned perfectly parallel to the sidewalk, facing directly toward my bench. The headlights were off, and the engine was dead silent. My heart was pounding against my ribs. Whoever was driving that car had intentionally tracked my movements throughout the night. Every single time I took a break, they had moved the car closer, and now they were sitting right in front of the door, waiting for me. I stood completely frozen, staring at the front windshield. I wanted to run inside, but I was terrified a sudden move would make them open the doors. The silence of the office park was deafening. I could hear the faint, rapid clicking of my own watch, but absolutely nothing from the vehicle. Trying to act natural, I slowly reached into my pocket and pulled out my phone, pretending to check a message while keeping my eyes fixed on the tinted glass. I started backing up toward the entrance, my hand reaching behind me to find the door handle. As I backed up, I noticed something shifting on the car's windshield. Because the morning temperature had dropped, a heavy layer of condensation was rapidly forming on the outside of the glass, turning it a milky white. Except for one spot. On the driver's side of the windshield, there was a clean, clear circle about the size of a handprint. It looked exactly like someone had taken their palm and wiped away the moisture from the inside of the glass. And right through that clear circle, I could see the faint outline of a person sitting perfectly still in the driver's seat, staring directly at me. They had been sitting in that freezing, dark car for hours, wiping the glass to keep a perfect line of sight on the concrete bench. I didn't wait another second. I grabbed the door handle, yanked it open, and threw myself inside the lobby, slamming the heavy door shut and turning the deadbolt. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely hold my keys. The moment the lock clicked, the silence outside broke. The sedan's engine roared to life with a loud, aggressive sputter. The driver didn't even turn on the headlights. They slammed the car into reverse, the tires screeching loudly as they backed away. I watched through the lobby windows as the dark shape of the car sped toward the exit, crashing straight through the wooden security gate before disappearing into the night. I called the police immediately, and they arrived 20 minutes later. They took my statement and looked at the shattered security gate, but because the office park's cameras were so low quality, they couldn't get a license plate number. Someone had deliberately timed my brakes and stalked me through the dark for hours. I quit that security job the very next morning. I couldn't bring myself to sit on that concrete bench ever again, knowing how easily someone could watch me from the dark. Even now, whenever I see an old sedan parked with its lights off in an empty lot, my stomach instantly drops. Would you have gone back outside for that last break, or stayed locked inside from the beginning? I was alone at the downtown office building, which wasn't unusual, but something about that night just felt different. My name is Landon Reeves. A few years ago, I took a job working for a commercial cleaning company to make some extra money. My assignment was a massive 15-story office building right in the middle of the city. I worked the overnight shift, from 10 p.m. until 6 a.m. By the time I arrived, the daytime employees were long gone and the heavy glass front doors were locked tight. I was the only person inside the entire building for 8 hours. My routine was always exactly the same. I would load up my heavy plastic utility cart in the basement, push it into the main service elevator, and take it all the way up to the top floor. From there, I would clean each level one by one, emptying trash bins, wiping down glass tables, and vacuuming, slowly working my way down to the lobby. It was a tedious job, but the pay was decent, and I usually didn't mind the quiet. There was just the low hum of the ventilation system and the soft whirring of the elevator cables. Most of the floors were identical, filled with rows of gray cubicles and corner offices. The only exception was the 11th floor. The company that rented that level had recently moved out, and the entire space was undergoing major renovations. Because there was exposed wiring, missing walls, and no active overhead lighting, the property manager had completely locked down the 11th floor. My supervisor told me to skip it entirely until the construction crew finished their work. For the first 2 weeks, everything went smoothly. But on a Tuesday night, something strange happened. I loaded my cart into the elevator in the basement and hit the button for the 15th floor. The metal doors slid shut, and I leaned back against the handrail, staring at the digital floor indicator as the car started to rise. I could hear the heavy mechanical hum of the motor pulling me upward through the dark shaft. Right as the digital display changed from 10 to 11, the elevator suddenly slowed down. I felt a slight jolt in the floorboards, and then the car came to a complete stop. A second later, the arrival chime rang out, and the doors slid open. I looked out into the hallway of the 11th floor. It was pitch black. The only light was the harsh fluorescent glow from inside my elevator cab spilling out onto the dusty carpet. The bright lights made it impossible for my eyes to adjust to the gloom outside, making the floor look like a massive black void. I stood there for a moment, waiting to see if a late working construction guy or a maintenance worker was going to step inside, but there was absolutely nothing. It was completely silent. I figured the old elevator system just had a random computer glitch. I hit the button for the 15th floor. The doors closed smoothly, and I went back to my normal routine. I didn't think much about it until the exact same thing happened the following night. I was heading up to start my shift, listening to the soft grinding of the cables. Right as I passed the 10th floor, the car slowed down, stopped, and the doors opened on the 11th floor. Once again, I was staring out into complete, suffocating darkness. I felt uneasy. It was strange enough for it to happen once, but twice in a row felt like too much of a coincidence. I reached over and pressed the button to close the doors so I could keep moving, but nothing happened. I pressed it again, harder this time. The doors stayed wide open. I stood perfectly still inside the bright elevator car, feeling completely exposed. The darkness of the 11th floor seemed to stretch on forever. Because the interior walls had been torn down for the renovation, there was nothing to block my view of the massive, empty space. I kept my eyes fixed on the shadows, half expecting to see someone standing out there just beyond the reach of the light. After what felt like a solid 30 seconds of dead silence, the doors finally slid shut on their own, and the elevator carried me up. By Thursday night, my stomach dropped just thinking about taking that initial elevator ride. I even considered taking the stairwell, but lugging a heavy cleaning cart full of supplies up 15 flights of stairs just wasn't realistic. I tried to convince myself it was just a mechanical error. The building was decades old, and things break down all the time. I pushed my cart into the elevator, hit the button, and braced myself. Just like the nights before, the elevator came to a smooth halt on the 11th floor. The door slid open, revealing the same heavy, empty darkness. But this time, something felt off. The air pouring into the small elevator cabin felt unusually cold, and there was a faint, sour smell hanging in the air, like sweat and old dirt mixing with the drywall dust. The doors stayed stuck open again. I aggressively mashed the close button, staring out into the dark, silently begging the doors to move. That was when I heard it. It was incredibly faint, coming from deep inside the unlit floor. It sounded like a heavy object being dragged across the rough carpet. It was a slow, deliberate friction that lasted for just a few seconds before stopping completely. My heart started pounding against my ribs. The floor went back to dead silence. I backed up into the corner of the elevator, keeping the heavy wooden handle of my mop tightly gripped in my hand. Finally, the doors closed. I spent the entire rest of my shift checking dark corners and constantly looking over my shoulder, terrified that the elevator was going to bring someone down to whatever floor I was working on. Friday night was my last shift of the week. I decided I was done dealing with the fear. When the elevator inevitably stopped on the 11th floor, I was ready. I had brought a heavy-duty metal flashlight from home. When the doors opened into the pitch-black hallway, the elevator stayed put just like before. The doors didn't even try to close. I knew I had to see what was going on. If a squatter was sleeping rough up there, I needed to report it to the property manager immediately. I left my cart in the elevator and took 2 cautious steps out onto the 11th floor. The carpet crunched slightly beneath my work boots. I clicked on my flashlight and swept the bright white beam across the open room. The light passed over thick exposed wires hanging from the ceiling, bare concrete support pillars, and tall stacks of drywall. Then, the beam landed on something sitting perfectly in the middle of the open floor, about 20 feet away. My breath caught in my throat. It was an old, thick leather office chair. It hadn't just been left there randomly by the construction crew. The chair was positioned directly facing the elevator doors. It was sitting exactly in the center of the walkway, aimed right at the spot where I had been standing every single night. The heavy dragging sound I had heard the night before wasn't construction materials shifting. It was someone physically dragging that heavy chair across the carpet, positioning it in the dark so they could sit and watch the elevator doors open. I didn't stick around to see if whoever dragged it there was hiding behind one of the concrete pillars just out of the light. I lunged backward into the elevator, frantically slamming my hand against the panel. Thankfully, the doors closed almost immediately. I didn't even go to the 15th floor. I hit the button for the lobby, grabbed my jacket from the break room, and walked straight out the front glass doors into the night. I called the property manager the next morning and told him everything. He sounded completely confused. He told me that he had personally padlocked the heavy fire doors to the 11th floor from the stairwell side so the construction crew's expensive tools wouldn't get stolen. The only way onto that floor was through the elevator, which required a special magnetic security key that only I and the manager possessed. He went to check the floor that afternoon with 2 city police officers. The heavy padlock on the stairwell was still perfectly intact, untouched from the outside. But when they took the elevator up to the 11th floor and the doors opened, they found the exact same black office chair sitting in the dark. Only now, it had been moved 10 feet closer to the elevator doors. I never went back to that building again. If you were trapped in an empty building, would you have stepped out to check the dark floor? Or would you have quit right on the spot? thought it was just my imagination while I was taking overnight customer service calls, until it happened again. My name is Marlo Bennett. A couple of years ago, I got hired for an overnight remote support position for a large retail company. I lived by myself in a small one-bedroom apartment on the third floor of an older building, and my shift ran from 11 p.m. to 7 a.m. The pay was decent enough, and mostly, I just dealt with customers complaining about delayed shipments, checking their refund statuses, or asking basic policy questions. My work setup was situated right in the corner of my living room. I had a company-issued laptop, an extra monitor, and a heavy, noise-canceling headset. During the night, the call volume was usually pretty low. I'd take a call, type some information into the database, and often have to place the customer on a brief hold to contact a different department or verify their account details. Whenever I put someone on hold, our phone system automatically played this generic, repetitive piano melody. I worked there for months, and I heard that same tinny piano loop so many times that it practically lived in my head. It was a Tuesday night around 2:30 a.m. when things started getting strange. I got a call from an older woman asking about a missing furniture delivery. I had to put her on hold to check the shipping carrier's tracking numbers. While the piano music was looping in my headset, I heard something faintly underneath it. It sounded like a quiet, distorted voice. It was so low and muffled that I couldn't make out any actual words. I just figured it was line interference, or maybe the customer had me on speakerphone and left the television running in the background. I took her off hold, finished processing the call, and honestly didn't think much of it. About an hour later, I received another call. This time it was a man asking about holiday store hours. I had to put him on a brief hold to look up his specific local branch in the system directory. As soon as the piano music started playing again, I heard the voice return. This time, it was definitely clearer. It was a man's voice, speaking in a low, flat tone right underneath the bright piano notes. I pressed the headset closer to my ear, trying to focus on the audio. I expected it to be a radio or a television commercial, but the cadence was completely wrong. It sounded like the voice was pacing itself, speaking specifically during the tiny gaps in the piano notes. I still couldn't understand the exact words, but something felt off. I unmuted my microphone and asked the customer if he was saying something to me. He sounded confused and said he was just sitting in his quiet car waiting for me to come back. The next night, I logged onto my terminal feeling a little anxious. The first few hours of my shift were completely normal, and I started to convince myself I had just been dealing with a bad audio driver the night before. But around 4 a.m., I had a long call with a woman trying to process a large electronic return. During the call, we ended up chatting for a minute while my computer system was slowly loading her invoice. I made small talk and mentioned that I was exhausted because my neighbor's dog had been barking in the hallway all afternoon. We both laughed about it, and then I put her on hold to finalize the refund ticket. The hold music started playing. A few seconds later, the low voice returned. My stomach dropped. This time, I could hear exactly what the voice was saying. It wasn't just random words or overlapping radio interference. It was repeating the exact sentence I had just said to the customer barely 2 minutes earlier. It mumbled, exhausted because my neighbor's dog had been barking. The recording sounded slightly distorted and mechanical, but the words were completely unmistakable. It was my exact phrasing, but spoken in that flat, unfamiliar male voice. I immediately took the customer off hold, gave her the confirmation number as fast as I could, and disconnected the line. I sat there in my dark living room, staring blindly at my computer monitor. I felt uneasy. Our calls were definitely recorded for quality assurance by the corporate office, but there was absolutely no reason for an external line to be playing my own conversations back to me over the hold music. It felt like someone had intentionally tapped into my specific audio feed and was actively listening to me in real time. I opened my company chat portal and messaged my overnight supervisor, asking if there was an issue with the phone system or if IT was running tests. She replied a few minutes later, saying the network was perfectly fine and no one else in the remote division was reporting audio issues. I tried to calm myself down. I took off my headset, stood up, and went to the kitchen for a glass of water. The silence of my apartment suddenly felt incredibly heavy. I kept looking at the front door, making sure the deadbolt was turned all the way. The idea of sitting alone in the dark, tethered to a headset with someone listening on the other end, made me want to log off right then and there. I went back to my desk and reluctantly put the headset back on. It was now 5:15 a.m. The queue remained totally empty for a long time. Then, a new call beeped into my terminal. I clicked the button to answer and recited my standard corporate greeting. "Thank you for calling support. My name is Marlowe. How can I help you today?" There was no response. It was just dead air. I waited a few seconds and asked again, "Hello? Are you there?" Nothing. But the line was definitely connected. I could hear a very faint, rhythmic breathing sound coming through the earpiece. My hands started to shake. Before I could move my mouse to hang up, the software on my screen suddenly switched to the hold status on its own. The familiar piano music started playing loudly in my ears. I reached for my mouse to force a disconnect, but I froze in my chair. The low, flat male voice was back. It was speaking right over the music, much louder and clearer this time. It wasn't repeating a casual conversation about my day anymore. It was reciting the exact personal details I had given to the Human Resources Department when I first applied for the job. It read out my full legal name, my personal cell phone number, and then it started reading my home address. It spoke the street name. Then it paused. Then it read the building number. And finally, it read out my specific apartment number. I ripped the headset off my head so fast it knocked my coffee mug onto the floor. I didn't even look back at the screen. I grabbed my cell phone, ran straight to my bedroom, and locked the door behind me. I sat on the floor with my back pressed against the wood, listening to the absolute silence of the apartment, terrified that I was going to hear footsteps right outside my front door. I stayed in that exact spot until the sun finally came up. When it was bright enough outside, I quickly packed a bag, left the apartment, and drove straight to my parents' house a few towns over. I called my supervisor from their kitchen table and quit the job immediately. I had my dad come with me a week later to pack up my apartment and return the company equipment. I never found out who or what was on the other end of that line. When I tried to escalate the issue, the company claimed there was no record of that final call anywhere in their system. According to their logs, my queue was completely empty from 5 a.m. until the end of my shift. I still work from home today, but I strictly refuse to take any jobs that involve phone support. Even now, whenever I have to call a company and they put me on hold, if I hear that generic piano music start to play, I immediately hang up the phone. Have you ever heard something you weren't supposed to while talking on the phone?